Hi, everyone. My name is Joe with Jonah Web, and I'm starting this new series on accessibility. It's something we're really interested in. We're actually a WordPress development company, and we've been doing WordPress for 10 plus years. But one of the things that we've noticed partnering with different designers and all the sites we've done over the years is that accessibility is not something that is talked about enough, are focused on enough. And it's also not something that we do from the beginning. So, this idea that I've heard many times about shifting left. So, accessibility shouldn't be something that we do on the back end of development. It should be done during the wireframing and design phase. And that means that the designers should have a better idea of accessibility as well as the developers to make a site more accessible to all. And so, what do we mean by that? When we talk about accessibility, we talk about the fact that uh, a website that is not accessible does not provide all the same resources for someone who has a disability as someone who is, who doesn't have any disabilities. And we want to make sure that we provide equal opportunity, just like a store must provide, equal options for somebody with a disability. So whether it's a ramp for somebody in a wheelchair, various things like that, so that they have the same access to the same resources. And that should be our goal. And that's what we're trying to do a better job of. It's something that we're learning. So we're creating these videos for you, but also for ourselves so that we can, push ourselves to be better and to be more inclusive. So it's something we're really excited about, and I hope you are too. And today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So it seems like a perfect opportunity to kick this off. And we wanted to start with something just really simple. So there's so much to accessibility, and it can be overwhelming. But if we just start taking little steps, our sites will be better and more accessible, and that's the goal. So today, I just wanted to talk about color contrast, working with different designers. That's something, because we partner with a lot of different agencies and work with designers. And it's something that we've noticed is that, they're not aware of color contrast requirements and meeting the 4.5 to 1 ratio for regular text, or the 3 to 1 ratio for larger text. So we just wanted to show you a little bit about that, and hopefully it's helpful, and hopefully it can, start more dialogue. So I wanted to show you an example I have set up here that shows, some basic elements on a web page, and, the contrast and which ones meet requirements and which ones do not meet requirements and why. And when we're doing this testing, we like to use certain tools. So I'm sure everyone is familiar, or if you're not familiar, this is a great tool, the WebAIM tool. Um, it's a great resource to go online, and it's very up to date. So you're going to have the most accurate information. So this is usually a go-to for testing your color contrast requirements, and it'll show you your contrast ratio and what you need to stay within. So for smaller text, it needs to be a 4.5 to 1 ratio. For bigger text, which is text that's 18 points, or 14 point bold, those are kind of the benchmarks for, large text versus small text. And then this shows you the different standards. So in general, we're focused on that double A standard. So the triple A standard is kind of the next level. Usually they don't necessarily recommend that for most websites. I think maybe for government sites and things like that, they might need to meet some of those standards, but really our focus is that double A standard. So you can see here that this is kind of their basic example, and it meets those requirements. And if you were to go lighter, you'd start to see that it does fail those requirements, because obviously that does not meet any contrast levels that would make it easy to read. So, but that being said, I actually really like this tool right here. And this is a free download from the TPGI site. And the reason I like it is because it is a standalone application. So you can use it in your browser, but you can also use it in Photoshop or anywhere that you are doing your design. So it's really useful for that reason. And with that in mind, just going back to this page we have set up, this first one is a real world example from a client I was working with and working with a designer. And they had this button here on the left, the lighter green with the white text. And the logical reason being that these are the brand colors. So usually you get a logo, you get brand guidelines, and those are the colors that are provided to you. So naturally you want to use those colors in your design. But a lot of times they don't meet those ratios that we need to meet to make sure that those who are visually impaired, either low contrast, impairments, things of that nature, that they can read the text and read the buttons, easily enough. So that's our focus. So, but you can see it's such a small change. So going from this lighter text, I just went ahead and started. So, with my app set up here, I just went in here and, highlight that. And then it says that it passes large text, but it fails regular text. So then all I need to do is start to drag down the lightness here. So I'm just going to drag it down until it passes. So now we see that the ratio is passed, and I can use that color, and it's still within those brand guidelines, because it's still the same overall feel. We're just altering the hue a little bit, or the tint a little bit, adding a little more white or adding a little more black to that color, just so that the contrast meets those requirements, so it's easier to read. So that was one example. Within our own site, I'm using our logo as an example, but the colors within it, a lot of times maybe you do a light blue with a white. I've seen that so many times, working with various designers, and this obviously does not meet those requirements. So how can you go from something like that to something that is easier to read, that has that contrast that we're aiming for, so that those who are visually impaired can read the text on our page? Because if they can't read the Shop Now button, then maybe they're gonna exit your site because they don't know what the action is, and they're not really sure how to buy the products on your site in that example. So I'm showing we can go from this to something like this. So maybe we're using a darker purple. Maybe we are introducing a new color just for the hover. So this would be the actual button, and this is our hover element, which is also really important, because you want to make sure that your button, when hovered over, or if someone is using a keyboard to navigate, that when the focus is on that button, that the color changes or something changes, so that they know that it's clickable. So I've seen that too, where sometimes buttons don't have a hover or a focus, or they have a hover but they don't have a focus. And in those situations, users don't have a good idea of what the action is that they can take. And I think it's important to note that although we want to make sure that our website is accessible to as many people as possible, it's also just good UI. And that's kind of one of the additional benefits of accessibility, is that we're also having a site with better usability. And that's really important. So these are just some additional examples of how we could meet those requirements and have an interactive button. And then moving on, this is a title. So this is a title of a web page or a widget, and this is the light blue text that does not meet those requirements. So if I were to select the foreground color here and change this just to our white, you'll see that it fails everything. But just with a slight difference, so you'll see this is just a slight difference. Um, it'll pass for larger text. So this one is the larger text, and it passes. So, and I mean, this is the difference is almost negligible. So, but it's important to note that there is a little bit of a difference, and that's going to make it easier to read. I might suggest in this case that we could even go darker. So, this is meeting kind of the bare minimum requirements, but you could even go darker if you want to. I just wanted to show, how little of a difference it is, but that it can make such an overall difference for your user experience. Another example I see a lot is the lighter gray text for body text. And again, just making that a little darker makes such a difference. So these are little things that we can just start to implement in all of our designs that can make a big difference. Another one, this is representing a field in a form. And you can see this is just a placeholder text, but it still needs to meet that requirement because that's really hard to read. So you want to make sure it's dark enough. And I would also argue that maybe placeholder text is not the best solution. Having a label above your input field is an overall better user experience for those using screen readers and various things like that. But just to show you an example of if you did have to use a placeholder text, you want to make sure it's dark enough. So another thing that you see a lot on websites is that top banner. Usually it's an image and it has a title. And a lot of times it is really hard to read. So this is kind of an extreme example, but you can see that if you were to just put this title over this image, you would not be able to read this. And these are just some different ways in which you can tackle the problem. So putting an overlay so that now it's easier to read. And one thing that's interesting about this is you can't just compare two colors, but with this tool especially, you can still have your different, you can still test it out. So you can sample maybe the lightest part and make sure that it passes. And then you can obviously sample darker parts and make sure that it passes. And this would be considered large text. So you really just need to make sure it passes that large text. But a lot of times you're not just going to have a title, you're also going to have subtext. So you want to make sure that all of that passes. But you can just kind of sample around. And remember that your sites usually are responsive. So just because you're testing it in a still doesn't mean as you drag down that you're not going to need to test other parts of the image. So you might even have to, when we talk about, let me get that foreground color back. If you talk about like if it were to go over this, would that pass? So even the lighter part of the fin passes for the large text. So that's a solution. There's also solutions where you just have, overlay at the bottom, or something like this, especially if you have an additional description. So those are ways in which you can go from something where the text is really hard to read on a banner to something that is much easier to read. And by doing some of these simple changes, we can start to make our site more accessible. Okay, so I hope that example that I showed you was really helpful as far as just seeing various buttons and text on a page, banners, and what we can do to make those more accessible, as well as the tools that I showed you. So I'd love to hear your comments on this video and what we've shown today, and create more dialogue. I'd love to hear advice, feedback, and if you are interested in learning more about accessibility, or if you are a company that is looking for assistance with making your site more accessible, we're starting a pilot program to do just that. So please go to our website, send us a message, and we'll be sure to get back to you or comment below. And thank you. And I look forward to hearing everybody's thoughts and working together to make the web more accessible.